I'm pulling a Ryan Pace and kidnapping Terry Fontenot to take over as the Falcons GM and break down which offensive free agents I'm signing this offseason.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, of course, the illustrious host of this Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family, your team every day. And you may know me as Mr. Drew. You may know me as Sirius Black. But, guys, I want to thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. Of course, it's free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, including on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Falcons on YouTube. Help us get over 5,000 subscribers, and you will get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. And, of course, check us out on your Roku and Amazon Fire TV by downloading the Locked On Sports Atlanta app on your Roku and Amazon Fire TV. So today's episode is going to be me outlining and breaking down all the moves that I would make if I was in Terry Fontenot's shoes for free agency for the offense specifically. And there's a lot of moves, so we'll have to sort of get through them quickly. But of course, as I said at the end of yesterday's episode, I figured the Falcons were going to spite me they decided on Monday to announce some of their coaching hires. And probably the most notable one was that Steve Jackson is being promoted to the Falcons' new secondary coach. And that's not a huge surprise. Jackson has a background as a secondary coach. He did that for 2 years with the Cincinnati Bengals in 2020 and 2021. He was primarily responsible for the corners in Cincinnati, but, I'm assuming that cornerback room is adjacent to the safety room, where there's a certain someone by the name of Jesse Bates that we're going to hope that coaching connection is able to lure Jesse Bates to Atlanta in a couple of weeks. But primarily it was a bunch of offensive and defensive assistants getting promotions. The Falcons did not name officially a quarterback coach or a D-line coach, but Arthur Smith did tell Scott Bair of AtlantaFalcons.com that offensive coordinator Dave Ragone would sort of pull double duty as the Falcons quarterbacks coach. The D-line, where we'll have Ryan Nielsen, the Falcons new defensive coordinator, kind of pull double duty, but he'll get some help from Lanier Gothi, who's promoted as a defensive front specialist. They'll also get some help from senior defensive assistant Dave Huxtable as well to help coach that defensive line. So with the Falcons spiting me, I'm going to spite them by basically, not caring about the rest of these coaching hires. Now, maybe at a later date, we'll revisit some of these because we'll be like, oh, this guy coached this guy 2 years ago at this school, and now that player is a third or fourth round target for the Falcons. And if you guys have any specific coaching hires or promotions that you want me to talk about that stand out to you, by all means, leave me a comment, hit me up at lockedonfalcons@mail.com. But let's move on from the coaching staff and let's talk free agency. And first up, the big decision that we have to decide when it comes to what the Falcons are going to do on offense is deciding what the quarterback position is going to be, guys. And as I told you guys back in early January, I am rolling with Desmond Ridder. I have that commitment. We are committed to Desmond Ridder. And it's not because I necessarily believe that Desmond Ridder is going to be a superstar that's going to, as he promised when we drafted him, hoist Lombardi trophies here in Atlanta. I tend to see, if I'm being completely honest, Desmond Ridder as more of a bridge quarterback. But I think that's a bridge to being a perennial playoff team. I do think Desmond Ridder has the potential to be one of the 10 to 15 best quarterbacks in the NFL. And the problem I kind of see is that I think a lot of the alternative options, whether that be the draft, whether that be signing a veteran, or even Lamar Jackson, a lot of those guys also kind of fit into that group of, probably one of the 10 to 15 best quarterbacks in the NFL. And I don't see what's the point of investing significant resources for what is probably going to amount for a marginal upgrade. And I know that's a controversial take, especially when you have a player with Lamar Jackson's accolades as a possible outcome. And I would certainly say Lamar is probably a little bit better than that. I'd probably put him in like 8th or 9th in terms of my quarterback rankings as of today. But I sort of see Desmond Ridder with development, a guy that could be potentially, let's say, the 13th best quarterback in the NFL. And to me, going from 13 to 8 at this point in time is not really worth the Falcons, giving up, 3 first-round picks and multiple day 2 picks and 20% of my salary cap over the next 3 years, right? Now, there may be a day in the future where I have a different opinion on that statement, and I think it is worth it for the Falcons, but that is going to be a point where I feel like the Falcons have assembled a very strong team, and basically they're a quarterback away from potentially winning it all, and we are not at that point. And, this is but what has been kind of the fascinating conversation that I've engaged with a number of you guys that are also on, let's roll with Desmond Ridder moving forward. But oftentimes I've noticed you guys say, let's roll with Ridder and build up the rest of the team. And it's clear to me that a lot of you guys see that as a fundamental choice between, either investing in trying to upgrade the quarterback position or building up the rest of the roster. And that's probably an oversimplification, but I don't think it's that far off base where it does feel like there is a fundamental choice that you have to make in terms of what you're going to invest resources in. And while I understand why other people might disagree with the idea of building up the roster before going and getting the quarterback, and certainly probably if you rewound the clock to May 2021, I probably would have myself disagreed with that sort of philosophy. But based off of where this regime's, not only their words, but their actions have been over the last 2 years since then, they clearly believe in a sort of team first, let's build the team up first philosophy before worrying about the quarterback. And so therefore it will be fascinating if they decide to go all in on Lamar Jackson. And that will basically be a dramatic shift in that, and only will further, add fuel to the fire that, I've said, teams make it up as they go. But I do think it makes a ton of sense to kind of follow their path at this point in time and see what you can grow and develop with this young group of skilled position players on the offensive side of the ball with Desmond Ridder, with Tyler Allgeier, Drake London, Kyle Pitts. Let's see what we can do with this offensive line and go from a unit that over the last 5 or so years has been consistently one of the worst units in the NFL to potentially turning it into one that could be one of the best in the years to come. And, let's build up that defense, right? We've been clamoring for a quality defense here in Atlanta for 25 years. Can we finally get that defense that, we've been spent an entire generation, of our lives trying to build? So let's do that. And so if we're going to roll with Desmond Ridder as our starter, it begs the question, what are we going to do at the backup quarterback position? I'm not going to be satisfied with Logan Woodside and Felipe Franks in that role. So obviously, if I'm the general manager of the Falcons, I am going to cut Marcus Mariota, get $12 million in cap savings. Now, I probably, as the GM, is probably a little bit more open than probably the Falcons would be, or many of you would be, to Marcus Mariota returning on a cheaper contract to be that QB2. But let's assume for a second that, Marcus goes to be the backup, let's say, to the Eagles or something like that. And so you got to replace him with another QB2. And I feel like Mitch Trubisky is the guy that I would peg as the new Falcons general manager. I assume he will be cut by the Steelers for similar reasons that Marcus Mariota is going to get cut here in Atlanta. The Steelers would save about $8 million, if I'm not mistaken, in cutting Mitch Trubisky. And I'm going to try to lure Mitch Trubisky here to Atlanta with the promise that he has a better opportunity for playing time here in Atlanta than he could find anywhere else. He will be able to compete for the roster. I will be, honest with Mitch Trubisky and tell him that it is Desmond Ridder's job to lose. And frankly, if it's a close competition, it will be Desmond Ridder's job. So the only way that you will be the Falcons week 1 starter is if you absolutely blow the doors off of Desmond Ridder. But that is an opportunity that you're going to get here in Atlanta that you're probably not going to get elsewhere. Right. And so when you look around the league, a lot of the other teams that have major question marks are probably going to get a more proven vet like the Jets or the Saints, or they're probably picking in the top 10 of the draft and probably will draft a rookie. So I do feel like Mitch Trubisky has a better chance here in Atlanta for playing time than he would have elsewhere. If that is not an enticing pitch for Mitch Trubisky, then probably my plan B would probably be to sign someone like Taylor Heineke. But right now, I'm not convinced that he's going to leave DC, given that he's basically been their best quarterback for 2-3 years running at this point in time. And why would Washington move on from him even if it's just for him being a backup to Sam Howell this year. So, but the case for Taylor Heineke is he's a local guy. He has the mobility that you need in this scheme. And he's a former teammate of TJ Yates from their shared days in Houston. So he checks all the boxes that you would want checked in terms of that familiarity, scheme fit, all that sort of stuff. But given that I don't think he's going to be available, that he'll stay in DC, I will go with Mitch Trubisky as the Falcons quarterback. And we'll move on to talk about the skill positions on today's Aaron is the New Falcons general manager episode of Locked On Falcons. And we'll talk about which running back I'm going to sign that complements Tyler Allgeier, as well as which wide receiver that can do the same for Drake London as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. But everybody wants to eat a little bit healthier this time of year. And if you're like me, you want to eat healthy but not have to compromise on taste. And Built Bar is the healthy protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar. And the thing that makes Built Bar so good is they're covered in 100% real chocolate. And you can check out flavors like peanut butter brownie and coconut almond. And not only do Built Bars taste great, they're healthy too. They're only 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar, but they have a whopping 17 grams of protein. And we always tell you to go to built.com to check out new flavors. You can do that right now to check out the limited time flavor of the cookie dough chunk. But if you're not interested in that or a mixed box over at built.com, more importantly, guys, you can now head on over to your local Walmart or Sam's Club to check out Built Bars. Head to your nearest Walmart, walk to the pharmacy section and grab yourself a 4-bar box of cookies and cream or double chocolate. And if you're at Sam's, run in and grab a 13-bar box of brownie batter or churro. So as we continue this exercise here, where I am the general manager of the Atlanta Falcons, one of my goals here with this episode is to try to be as realistic as possible. And that is primarily going to be looking at a lot of players and that, have these coaching connections that we've talked a lot about over the last, few months and years that, is very important to this current regime, that they tend to go with players that they are familiar with. And so frankly, my process was like, well, if there's a player that has a coaching connection that I like in terms of his fit in Atlanta, then there's no need for me to go beyond that. Right now, when we get later in the episode with the offensive line, we'll probably veer a little bit more into fantasy world, but I'm trying to stay a little bit more grounded and realistic to balance that out with these skill position players. So let's talk about running backs. And as you guys know, Tyler Allgeier, I was a little skeptical of him going into the year after we drafted him, but he blew the doors off of my expectations. And so I'm more than happy to have Tyler Allgeier be the Falcons RB1 in 2023. But I do feel like RB2 is a major question mark. And, that's owed to Cordero Patterson's age and the fact that he's never been a running back that has been able to carry the ball 10 or more times in more than 4 consecutive games. You have Caleb Huntley, who's coming off an Achilles injury, and recent history kind of tells us that it takes the better part of 2 or 3 years for running backs to recover from that, if they do recover. And so I do feel like the Falcons have major depth question marks. And I think it goes down to the idea of what is good depth. And I think the common assumption that a lot of people make, and it's not wrong, is that, having good depth is having starters that are or backups that are just as good as your starters. And that is true to a certain extent, but it's not realistic that you can have an entire roster full of those guys. What really good depth is, in a more realistic way, is that you don't have to change the way that you play if and when a starter goes down. And given you look at the Falcons' identity and that they're a physical run-first football team, if Allgeier got down and CP, given the concerns surrounding CP and Huntley, there's a reality where they're an Allgeier injury away from having to rely on Avery Williams. And no disrespect to Avery Williams, but I think you're going to lose your identity if you're relying on Avery Williams to be that kind of workhorse in this physical run-first identity. So my goal at the RB2 position is to find someone that can complement Allgeier, but also maintain that identity. And when we talk about complementing Allgeier, he's a grinder, right? He's the guy that on 3rd and 2, he's just going to lower the head and smash it in there. That's his superpower. And so I want a running back that has a different superpower, ideally a superpower that he can find those creases and those cracks and sort of be more of that slashing type of runner on those 3rd and 2s that can find those creases and those cutback lanes and all that various things. And initially my goal would be, hey, let's draft that guy. And I'd still be open to drafting that guy. Always, you want to have fresh young legs in the building. But I did initially look at the list of veteran free agents and be like, okay, look, maybe there's somebody we can bring into camp as a camp body, someone similar to kind of Damian Williams was last year. But as I was looking at, that list of free agents, I saw like the guy that's kind of the perfect RB2. And like, we don't even have to wait to the draft to find that player. And that to me was Cleveland Browns running back D'Ernest Johnson, who spent the last several years as the RB3 there. And I think the thing that's going to lure Johnson here to Atlanta is the fact that he'll have more opportunities to run the football. To me, his skill set is reminiscent of what Devontae Freeman was. He's a slightly bigger version of Devontae Freeman, who is more of that slashing type of running that was very effective in this outside zone scheme that we ran back in 2015 through 2017. And, I imagine a scenario where D'Ernest Johnson and Tyler Allgeier can kind of be a RB1, RB2 combination, similar to what we see with Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon, Zeke and Tony Pollard in Dallas, what we saw with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt back in 2020 over a D'Ernest Johnson, or what we've seen in recent years with Denver with Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams. And typically those guys tend to have a 55-45 split. 55% of the carries go to, in our case, Tyler Allgeier, 45% go to D'Ernest Johnson. And I feel like it should be pretty self-evident how valuable it is to have two good running backs versus one good running back. But apparently that has been a very controversial opinion, an idea amongst a certain subset of Falcon fans this offseason. Now, another option to me that I don't think is as realistic as a D'Ernest Johnson is someone like Minnesota's Alexander Madison, who has a similar skill set. But I do imagine Madison will probably have a few more suitors than Johnson will. And so therefore maybe a little bit more expensive. I'm imagining, you could probably get Johnson on like a 3 or 4 million per year average. And leading the way for the Johnson Allgeier combination is going to be a brand new fullback. I am replacing Keith Smith with former Chicago Bears fullback Khari Blasingame, who was also with the Tennessee Titans with Arthur Smith in 2019 and 2020, was very good in those years. And I feel like that you're getting younger, you're getting a more physical blocker, and you're also getting a player that can contribute on special teams. So he checks all the boxes that you're looking for at that position. So let's move on, talk about the wide receivers. And I don't feel like I have to spend as much time explaining why the Falcons need to upgrade their number 2 wide receiver spot as I did talking about the running back position. But you've heard me say many times over the last few months that the Falcons need to add more speed to that. I'm hoping to do that with Corey Davis. I know Corey Davis is not a true burner, but he does have some more verticality than what the Falcons currently have in that position. And he did that in Tennessee. He makes total sense for the Falcons. I fully expect Davis to be cut by the New York Jets. And I feel like it's a great marriage between both parties. The Falcons need a quality number 2. Davis brings a little bit more juice than what the Falcons had there. And of course, he had his best years playing under Arthur Smith in Tennessee. And after a couple of lackluster seasons in New York, it makes total sense for him to, quote unquote, come home to Atlanta. And I'm hoping you can get Corey Davis on like a 1 or 2 year deal, averaging somewhere between 10 and 12 million. But I do wonder, given there's a lot of wide receiver needy teams out there isn't a sort of robust market this offseason in free agency or in the draft, and whether that drives up the demand for someone like a Corey Davis and he is able to price himself out of the Falcons range. Other guys that I am intrigued by are Jacoby Myers with the New England Patriots, Alan Lazard of the Green Bay Packers. Myers seems like he'll be a lot more expensive than that. I think PFF is projecting him at $16 million a year. I saw somebody tweet today that he may make $20 million a year this offseason. PFF projects Lazard at $11 million a year. And that's kind of the price around where I want Corey Davis at. And given the familiarity with Corey Davis, he'll get the nod above Alan Lazard. But, let's talk about the wide receiver 3 spot. I want Olamide Zaccheaus back, probably looking at a price tag somewhere between $5 and $8 million a year. Hopefully the lower the better. But one does imagine, given what we just talked about with the demand for wide receivers outweighing the supply, does that allow someone like Olamide Zaccheaus to get a contract more than that, or get better opportunities elsewhere where someone is going to be willing to basically maybe not pay him like Christian Kirk, but basically make him their version of Christian Kirk as a number 2 wide receiver. So if that is the case, then I think that's where you turn to some of the quote unquote speed guys like a Paris Campbell, like a Miko Hardman. I look at those guys, as I've said before, I want to get speed. Those guys do provide a lot more speed at the position, but I don't see those guys as guys that you add in addition to retaining Olamide Zaccheaus. I see those guys as more replacements for Olamide Zaccheaus. So to me, between those three guys, you should be able to keep one of those guys, and I probably prefer OZ just because he has the familiarity within the scheme, even if he may not be quite as explosive as those other two guys are. But in addition to, Corey Davis and hopefully keeping Olamide Zaccheaus, I'm also going to try to retain Kadero Hodge and Damiere Byrd as my number 5 and number 4 wide receivers respectively. I'm still probably going to look at drafting a wide receiver in April at some point, probably between rounds 2 and 4. And hopefully that guy can also add some much needed speed at the position. So hopefully that will lead to an upgrade at the wide receiver position. Let's talk tight ends. No real changes here. All I'm going to just do is sign the unicorn, Michael Pruitt. Probably will let Anthony Firkser walk. I still may draft a tight end if a good player falls, to day 3 or something like that. But between the unicorn, Michael Pruitt, between Parker Hesse, Kyle Pitts, John Fitzpatrick coming off of IR, and of course the other unicorn in the building, Felipe Franks, I feel like I'm pretty good at the offense, at the tight end position. And so I'm not really interested in trying to incorporate a new guy into the mix and try to get him involved. I'm really just focused on, let's just get Kyle Pitts involved more in the offense this upcoming season. That should be the project at the tight end position, not trying to incorporate a new guy. So we will move on and talk about the offensive line. And this is where things are going to get a little bit crazy. Am I re-signing Kaleb McGary? Am I upgrading the guard position? Find out all that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. But first, guys, I want to plug the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with 2 new hosts, Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez of the Draft Network. All week long, they're getting you guys geared up for the combine, which will begin probably today. As some of you guys are listening to, the workouts will be a little bit later in the week, but those guys are breaking it down. Find them wherever you get your podcasts. So as I said, this is where things are going to get a little bit more crazy. And let's talk about what is realistic for what we might see for the offensive line. And, I expect that the Falcons will basically run it back with the starting 5 that they had a year ago. They ran it back with the previous year's starting 5 and last year's, 2021 starting 5 into 2022, and 2022's starting 5 was so much better than 2021. So why not, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, which will be another topic that we'll circle back to. So I do expect them to retain Kaleb McGary at right tackle. I do expect them to retain Elijah Wilkinson at left guard, maybe have a competition between Wilkinson and Matt Hennessy for that left guard starting spot. I do think they'll probably draft some depth along the offensive line, probably re-sign Chuma Edoga as their primary swing tackle, maybe re-sign Kobe Gossett as another depth piece that can come in and compete. So I fully expect pretty much the entirety of the 2022 Falcons offensive line, probably minus Jermaine Ifedi, being back in the building, with the goal of the Falcons being to add to that room versus subtract. But I'm not going to do that. I'm subtracting, which means I am moving on from Kaleb McGary. I'm not moving on from Elijah Wilkinson, but I am moving on from Kaleb McGary. If I am the Falcons general manager, I'm allowing him to test the market and letting him walk. And we'll probably next week do a whole episode devoted to the case for and against Kaleb McGary. But the preview of that, it simply boils down to the case for him is because you value stability in that offensive line room, and the case against him is you basically feel that you can do better. And I tend to side on the side of, I feel like I can do a lot better than Kaleb McGary. And I know a lot of you guys are shocked by that because, I'm the head of tourism over at McGary Island, but that was not a job I took by choice, guys. I was marooned on Kaleb McGary Island, right? And I recognize it as a 2-star resort. It's been trying to make the best out of my situation. And mostly the reason why I was marooned on this island, because it was like, well, in terms of the options available, it's a lot better here on McGary Island than it is on, say, Mayfield Island, right? But, now we're a year later and, it feels like the resort has made some upgrades. So, we've gone from a 2-star resort to like a 3-star resort, and that's fine. But now there's a boat that has come to rescue us and save us from this island. And we find out that boat is fully intending to head on over to the 5-star resort that exists somewhere out there, off the horizon. But unfortunately, they don't necessarily have a GPS on this boat, so they don't know exactly how to get there. And so I use that analogy because the 5-star resort is basically the Falcons upgrading the right tackle position. There is another player out there that is better than Kaleb McGary. It's just not guaranteed that we're going to get that player. That's what I mean by that. So they're going to, go on a wing and a prayer, hoping that they just happen to stumble upon this island. So there is a risk. That is a gamble, certainly. And, you have the choice of either getting on that boat or staying on the island where it's less risky. It's less of a gamble. You have food, you have shelter. Even if the food gives you the bubble guts, even if the shelter leaks when it rains, there is a choice there. And so that goes to a point I've made many, many times on this podcast. Ultimately we often try to juxtapose these things as, oh, this is a right choice and this is a wrong choice. It's a preference. Or, it's a preference. Do you value security and you're going to stay on the island, or do you, have a preference to get on that boat and go on an adventure that, may end in disaster or, may end in, joy and and everything. I don't know. But, so I think if you value stability, right, and you want to keep McGary here, then you're literally going to value that so that you will pay for that value, right? And while I do value stability, I only really value that at, say, like $8 to $10 million a year in terms of what I would be willing to pay Kaleb McGary. And you see projections like PFF that have him at like $13 or $14 million a year. And if you value stability, then you would look at maybe the $5 million difference between those two marks and say that's more than worth it. I'm willing to do that. I'm not. Right. I value Dwayne Ledford being able to make up that $5 million difference. I value the stability that Dwayne Ledford as the Falcons offensive line coach provides. And frankly, my plan at the offensive line is to make Dwayne Ledford earn his paycheck. Right. So, we might slip $5 million into his paycheck after what I plan to do. And so I've mentioned this before, I'm taking a grenade, walking down the hall, going up to the offensive line room, opening the door, tossing it in. We're going to shake things up. That's putting it mildly. So McGary's walking. So what do we do at the right tackle position? Probably not a whole lot, right? My plan ideally is we're going to find McGary's replacement and potential upgrade with one of these top 100 picks. I have full confidence that Dwayne Ledford will be able to develop that player into a much better player than what Kaleb McGary has been these last couple of years. And so I am fine with the idea of the Falcons potentially at the right tackle position taking one step back, because I believe that they have the potential to take 2 or 3 steps forward in the future. Now, I might add a veteran. I'm looking at players like Dennis Kelly, who played for Arthur Smith in Tennessee at that right tackle position. I'm looking at a player like Brandon Shell, who's been kind of a journeyman the last couple of years, but is well-versed in an outside zone scheme. Both of these guys are above average to solid run blockers, but, limited pass protectors. So I feel like you're kind of getting a poor man's Kaleb McGary for a lot cheaper. I'm expecting these guys to sign deals like in the $3 to $5 million range. So you're getting them for like a third of the price, but you're probably getting like 75 to 80, if not 90% the player that Kaleb McGary is. And so, with the right tackle position in flux, in addition to this veteran, in addition to this rookie, I might have Chuma Edoga competing for that spot. I might even have Elijah Wilkinson competing for that spot rather than going back and competing for the left guard position at that right tackle position. And so with right tackle being in flux, let's take the grenade and spread that shrapnel to the right guard position, because my one big addition that I am making this offseason is at the right guard position, and that is signing Tennessee Titans guard Nate Davis. Pro Football Focus projects him to make a contract of $7.5 million a year. And this, to me, if that is accurate, this is very good bang for your buck. Now, the issue with Nate Davis is he's been exclusively played on the right side of the offensive line going back to his days at UNC Charlotte. So I'm going to keep him on the right side by having him play right guard. He's a great scheme fit. Obviously, from his days at Tennessee, he's a very excellent second-level blocker. The Falcons need another one like that in addition to what Chris Lindstrom brings to the table. And so talking about Chris Lindstrom, if Nate Davis is going to be the new right guard, what happens to Christian Lindstrom? Well, this is where things are going to get a little bit wacky, guys. But my goal here is to basically start the 5 best guys in the building, right? And that may mean Chris Lindstrom starting at center. That may mean if Chris Lindstrom starting at left guard. So basically, if Drew Dalman is also one of the 5 best offensive linemen in the building, then Lindstrom's going to be the left guard and Dalman will be the center. But if not, then Lindstrom will be the center and somebody else will be that left guard. And maybe that's Wilkinson. Maybe that's Matt Hennessy. Maybe that's a rookie. Who knows at this point in time? And now I know you're going to sit here and say, Aaron, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I get that. I'm fine with Drew Dalman as a center, but we all sort of missed the days of having an Alex Mack type of anchor, and we saw how much that improved the offensive line back in 2016. To me, there is not a clear-cut Alex Mack type of player in this free agency or in the draft. And so, I look at free agents and potential free agents like Ryan Kelly with the Colts, Chase Roulier with the Commanders, 2 guys that some people think are going to get cut this offseason, but both of those guys are very good players when they're healthy, but they have not been very healthy the last couple of years. So those are gambles. And I feel like Lindstrom is your best bet to basically be that Alex Mack type of player. Now you question, can he play center? I don't know. I think he has the skill set to do so, but even if he can't, then you put him at left guard. And then you say, Aaron, but didn't you just say, Nate Davis never played on the left side of the offensive line. Neither has Chris Lindstrom. And, you're not willing to move Nate Davis to that side. And I'm like, yeah, but I also have a extremely high opinion of Chris Lindstrom. And I also have an extremely high opinion of Dwayne Ledford. And so basically, I think Chris Lindstrom can do whatever he wants, right? If Chris Lindstrom commits himself to wanting to be the best center in the league, he'll be the best center in the league. If he commits himself to learning the footwork of being a left guard, he'll be able to make that transition. And I think Dwayne Ledford is certainly capable of getting him there. And so basically overall, when I look at my plans of the offensive line, we're going to be in a similar place that we were at the beginning of the 2022 summer, where we had open competitions at 3 spots. We knew Jake Matthews at left tackle. We knew Chris Lindstrom at right guard, but we didn't know who was going to be the starters at the other 3 spots. Now we know Jake Matthews at left tackle. We know Nate Davis at right guard, and we know Chris Lindstrom's going to be starting somewhere, but we don't know who the other 2 starters are going to be. And it probably will be Drew Dalman at center. It will probably potentially be a rookie at that right tackle position. And so, as I said earlier, Dwayne Ledford's going to have his work cut out for him, but hey, he's an offensive line guru. I tell him, go and figure it out. So overall, when we look at the moves that I have made on offense as the Falcons general manager, and now I will take the duct tape off of Terry Fontenot. I will unlock the door and let Ryan Pace out of the room, and so they can marvel at the wonderful job I've done. And you look at the job I've done, you're like, okay, Mitch Trubisky, Dearness Johnson, Khari Blasingame, the Davis brothers, and Corey and Nate, that's not necessarily earth-shattering. But again, going back to an earlier point we made, I think the goal on offense is less about let's revamp and make wholesale upgrades to the offense, and let's just find, complementary pieces and role players that can continue to grow with and help the development of some of these young pieces that we already have, like a Ridder, an Allgeier, a London, and a Pitts, etc. So I do think this is somewhat close to reality and what we could see the Falcons do on the offensive side of the ball. I do think players like Trubisky and Corey Davis are definitely realistic options. I do not expect the Falcons to toss a grenade in the offensive line room. I do not expect the Falcons to go out there and invest significant resources at running back or fullback in free agency, probably waiting to the draft to invest resources at those 2 positions. So I do think their grand strategy is going to be similar to mine, which is let's develop some of these in-house options rather than making wholesale changes, but it may not necessarily be exactly like mine. The philosophy is there, but the actual execution of that philosophy might not be there. But later this week, when we break down, when I basically lock Ryan Pace back up and put Terry Fontenot back in the trunk, I'm having fun making these mental images, guys. But when we do that again later this week, when we talk about the defensive free agents I'm going to sign, there will be wholesale changes. It will be a very different ball game. We're not just signing guys that can complement what we already have. We're signing guys that can be kind of pillars of building more than what we already have. So that is on deck later this week. We'll probably do that on Friday's episode. But in the meantime, guys, we got the combine coming up, and tomorrow's episode, assuming the Falcons do not do it to spite me again, proof positive that Arthur Smith makes Locked On Falcons his first listen, because he had to get this in out of spite. But Tomorrow, we're going to plan on doing a combine preview and probably look primarily at the offensive players that have a chance to help themselves at this year's combine. So we'll get into that on tomorrow. Make sure you continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check out Locked On NFL Draft for your second listen. Again, you can listen to my opinions. They are not the expert opinions, especially when it comes to the draft. Listen to Damian, listen to Keith when it comes to that. They are definitely much more informed than I am when it comes to the NFL draft. Hopefully by the time we get to April, I can hang with those guys when it comes to 2023 draft knowledge, but we are not quite there yet. So continue to make Locked On NFL Draft your second listen wherever you get your podcast. Appreciate it, guys. Till tomorrow.